the start of a session.
So I can hear you. Just give me the thumbs up if you've started. Thank you. Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Joburg. This is it. You can see it on your screen. Sorry, we can't really welcome you to Joburg. Hopefully we can do this next year. We were just talking about some ways of applying for funding so that we can make the real event next year. This is our university. It's always worth showing it to people because, well, it's a thing of brutish beauty. So here's where we'll be welcoming you next year, hopefully. I just wanted to say thank you to our three keynote speakers, Boaz, Karen, and T, for agreeing to talk to us, because we're hoping to set a kind of research trend here. And obviously these are the people working on the forefront on the epistemology of the internet. And so we're very grateful to have them with us, even if they haven't quite woken up. And here's Karen. Karen, I was just thanking you and Boaz and T for being here for us. And I wanted to also say thank you to Abe and Caitlin, who really organized this event, as well as picked our awesome keynote speakers for us. And UJ Faculty of Humanities, who made the advertising material for us. And of course, all of you for being here in this awkward way that we've been, but it's good to have you all. And I'm really, really excited about the next few days because I think we're going to make some epistemology of internet history. So without further ado, let me, sorry if I can manage this, give the floor to Chris Lake Turner from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, who's going to tell us about meta-epistemic negotiation and epistemically online behavior. Chris, over to you.
Thanks so much. I've just pasted a link to the slides in the chat if you prefer looking at them that way. And I'm sharing my screen and hopefully everything's good. So unless I hear objections otherwise, I'm just going to go for it. So let me reiterate my thanks to all of you for being here. To Abe and Caitlin, and thanks also Betty for organizing this. It's a real pleasure to be here today. So this is the sort of start of a project where I want to apply some conceptual machinery to try and diagnose a particular kind of what I'm going to call epistemically toxic online behavior, and eventually, hopefully, have some useful sort of things to say as far as solving the issues that this behavior raises, although I should stress that most of this talk is going to be diagnostic rather than offering wonderful solutions, but maybe you can give me some in the Q&A. So here's the sort of key claim that I want to make today. It's that we can shed light on an epistemically toxic kind of disagreement by thinking of it as involving a meta-epistemic conflict as well as a first-order one. There's a lot to unpack there, and that's basically what the next 20 minutes or so is going to have me doing. But just to give you a feel for what I'm talking about, here's a simple example. So suppose that someone, is having a disagreement about whether the election was rigged or not. That's what I'm going to call a first order disagreement. It's a disagreement about some, worldly fact, whether P. So that disagreement about whether P is also, I want to claim, and perhaps more importantly in some contexts, a disagreement about some epistemic question. So it's a meta-epistemic disagreement about, say, who to believe about whether P, or which sources are trustworthy, or what kinds of fundamental methods of evidence gathering are in bounds or out of bounds. And so my sort of key idea here is that we can make better sense of some of our most sort of toxic and entrenched disagreements by recognizing that even though they might be sort of clothed in first order apparel, there's this importantly higher level meta-epistemic disagreement going on. So that's basically the claim. And there's a lot to make clearer and to defend here. So here's how I'm going to do that. I want to start by telling you what I mean by epistemically toxic behavior. And then I'm going to zero in on a particular kind of behavior, which I call entrenched disagreement online. Then once we've got the target on the table, I want to draw on and develop some conceptual tools to try and perform this diagnostic task. So in particular, I'm going to introduce this concept of meta-epistemic negotiation, which is a fancy name for something that I think is really widespread. And then I'm going to draw on some of Thi Nguyen's work on echo chambers to also help me understand, or try and help us together understand what's going on in these situations. And then putting together these two things, these two bits of machinery, the meta-epistemic negotiation and the echo chambers, I'm going to try and draw some conclusions about what's going on here, and some very sort of speculative suggestions about what to do and what not to do about it. So let's start then with epistemically toxic behavior. So I'm thinking here about a kind of environmental level of analysis. I'm interested less in, how to evaluate individual actors necessarily, and I'm interested more in thinking about our epistemic environments, and sort of sum total of resources and conditions that individuals have or have to draw on in order to go about their epistemic lives. And so epistemically toxic behavior is behavior that pollutes or degrades the epistemic environment, by which I mean it makes it harder for that community, for those in that epistemic environment, to gain or to sustain positive epistemic statuses, like knowledge, understanding, wisdom, justification, whatever positive epistemic statuses you want to focus on. Toxic behavior is going to make it harder to gain or to keep some of those. So that's what I mean by epistemically toxic. There's a lot of behavior that might fall under that description. So I want to hone in on a particular kind of behavior that I think is becoming more and more common, unfortunately, because I think it is toxic and problematic in ways that we'll see. So the phenomenon that I want to hone in on, I'm going to call entrenched disagreement online, or EDO for short. So I need to tell you what it means to be a disagreement, what it means to be entrenched, and what it means to be online. So when I say a disagreement, I want to, following some other authors, distinguish between a state of disagreement and an activity of dispute. So disagreement, I'm thinking of as a state where two interlocutors, we could think about intrapersonal agreement, and we could think about, disagreement among multiple people. But to keep things simple, let's focus on the case of two interlocutors, or just two people. They might not necessarily be in dialogue yet. They're in a state such that they have attitudes that rationally conflict. Paradigmatically, that's going to involve one person holding that P and another person holding that not P. So paradigmatically, this is going to involve, some kind of logical contradiction. But I want to understand rational conflict as being broader than that. I want to allow for various kinds of expressive analyses of, say, normative terms. So whatever you think that's important about rational conflict, disagreement can encompass that. But paradigmatically, it's when two people hold logically incompatible claims. So disagreement is a state. A dispute is an activity or a process whereby people express a disagreement, or seem to express a disagreement. Maybe after the dispute has been going on a while, they realize that they didn't disagree at all. So, typically a dispute happens verbally or via other kinds of linguistic methods. People give claims, they maybe give reasons for them, or maybe they just shout at one another, depending on the quality of the dispute. So disagreement's the state, dispute is the activity. For a disagreement to be entrenched, so for a state of disagreement to be entrenched, I'm going to leave this fairly vague, and we can sort of try and precify it more in the Q&A if you'd like. But basically, I just mean that neither side is likely to change their mind if even after significant dispute. So it's unlikely that after disputing about it and people giving evidence of various kinds and so on and so forth, it's unlikely that either side's going to budge. And then finally, for a disagreement to be online, I mean for the disputes that express it to primarily happen through online media, through the internet, typically things like social media and things like that. There's nothing intrinsically online necessarily, I don't think, about entrenched disagreement, but because most of us inhabit epistemic environments where a lot of our epistemic lives are conducted online, I think it makes sense to focus on the internet and online spaces as our primary sources of analysis. And that's why I'm really glad that this workshop is happening. So here are some questions about EDOs that I want to raise and try and answer, at least to some degree. Why are they entrenched? Why are they so intractable? Why are people so unlikely to budge? Given that they're entrenched, and sometimes you get the sense that participants in these disputes have a feeling for that. Why do people bother disputing about them? Why do people bother trying to convince flat earthers that the earth is round, say? Similarly, why do disputes about EDOs often become highly charged? Sometimes that seems fairly easy to explain. If the disputes about who won the election, then it's natural to think that sort of important issues of political identity or something like that are going to be implicated. But it's less easy to see why people get so worked up about the bare geometrical facts of the Earth's shape. So why is it that, EDOs can become so highly charged? Answering those questions is going to help me better hone in on why they're toxic. And then I'll make some very brief remarks about what we should do about all this, EDOs in particular, and maybe other kinds of epistemically toxic online behavior. Okay, so I need to get some conceptual resources on the table in order to answer those questions. The first I'm calling metaepistemic negotiation. I'm inspired here by a literature on a different phenomenon called metalinguistic negotiation. There are similarities and differences between what I'm interested in and what that literature is interested in. We could talk about that in the Q&A if you like, but I'm just going to focus on the thing that's important for our purposes. So metaepistemic negotiation, I think, is fairly widespread and commonplace. So to give you a grip on what I mean, here's a toy kind of case. It's common knowledge for A and B that A gets their news from accredited news and B from believable radio. Now suppose that they have the following dispute. A, did you hear the Aardvarks beat the Beavers last night? B, no, the Beavers won the match last night. A, no, I'm sure that the Aardvarks won. B, you're mistaken, the Beavers won. Not a very productive dispute by any means, but illustrative for my purposes. So here's what I claim is going on in a dispute like this. On the one hand, there's a first order epistemic disagreement being expressed by that dispute. They disagree about who won the match, about a first order kind of claim. But I think also there's plausibly a meta-epistemic disagreement here about which source to trust about who won the match. They disagree about whether accredited news or believable radio is more likely to get right, sports-related facts or something like that. Pinning down that disagreement might be difficult, but the idea here is it's not just about whether P, about who won the match, but it's about some epistemic question that bears on how we should answer the question of whether P, which sources are reliable, so on and so forth. And so if that's right, then A and B are engaged in what I'm calling meta-epistemic negotiation, which is a meta-epistemic disagreement about who to believe or whether P or some other kind of epistemic question, but it's expressed via a first order epistemic dispute about whether P. So, when you look at A and B's little dialogue, it just looks like what they're disagreeing about is, this first order question, who won the match? But really, I think this is also expressing an important, maybe a more important in some sense, disagreement about who they take to be trustworthy with respect to match-related facts. And again, I don't think that this phenomenon is especially sort of rare. In fact, I think it's fairly ubiquitous. But I think we haven't paid enough attention to it yet. And I hope that by doing so, we can shed some light on some of these phenomena that we're interested in. So that's one half of the diagnostic package. The other is to draw on T. Nguyen's work on echo chambers. So just in case you're not familiar with T's work, he draws a distinction between epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. So epistemic bubbles are epistemic situations that arise from a lack of coverage. So you're not getting certain information on a certain issue, say. So for example, I might be in an epistemic bubble with respect to benefits of pet ownership because I'm just on Dog Lovers Instagram. And I get lots of great information about how good dogs are for humans to live with, how they improve your mental health, your physical health, and so on and so forth. But I get no information because I just don't follow any of the cat loving people about, that also there are benefits to living with cats. So I'm in an epistemic bubble with respect to the benefits, the health benefits of living with non-human animals. The good news about epistemic bubbles and how to remember them, if you're confused about the terminology, the mnemonic is bubbles are easily burst. If I start getting exposed to some of the pro-cat information and I'm in a fairly rational frame of mind, I'll update my beliefs accordingly and realize that, like, okay, dogs are phenomenal. No one's going to change their mind about that necessarily. That's just a correct fact about the world. But cats are pretty great too. And so it's not that epistemic bubbles are innocuous exactly. We should look out for them, but they're easily burst. And the more pernicious phenomenon, Nguyen argues, is an echo chamber. So I like to think of echo chambers as being due to inappropriately skewed credibility distributions. So we are social epistemic agents, and we have to rely on others, other sources, for a lot of our epistemic lives. And as we go about our business, we find that certain sources are more trustworthy than others, and we assign credibility scores. I mean, we don't actually do this. This is a model. We assign credibility scores to various sources. We see that someone's more reliable, and we might fine-grain this to a domain. My car mechanic's really reliable about my car, but maybe less reliable about other matters, my health, whereas vice versa for my doctor. So we might fine-grain it to a domain, but just for simplicity, we can imagine that we assign a credibility score to each of our sources, and that's great. And they're going to differ. People are more or less reliable as we discover that they're making correct predictions. We want to upgrade their credibility. If we discover that they're making bad predictions or outright lying to us or something like that, we'll downgrade their credibility distribution. So we each have these credibility distributions, and that's good, that's appropriate. The problem and how echo chambers arise, according to Nguyen, is when these credibility distributions get really skewed. So you give way too much credibility to a small number of sources, and they use that excess credibility that you've given, that overconfidence, to discredit all the other sources. And now you're in a really bad epistemic situation, because you're basically going to believe everything that your overly placed confidence sources tell you, and be very unwilling to believe anything that anyone else says if it conflicts with what the sources are telling you. So for instance, suppose you're in an echo chamber about the shape of the Earth, and you'll basically just believe everything that you read on, I don't know, flatearthfacts.com. And part of what flatearthfacts.com does is discredit your credibility in other places that you might get information about the shape of the Earth. One thing that's really important about this analysis, and one reason that I think it's powerful, and that I also think we need to think about environmental levels of analysis here, is that those in echo chambers needn't have a disdain for truth or facts, even so far as to say that they might be acting quite rationally given their skewed credibility distributions. If you really think that flat Earth facts is that trustworthy and everyone else isn't with respect to the Earth's shape, it might be very rational for a flat earther to behave in the kind of ways that they behave. And so I think that's important to realize, because sometimes we get in the habit of thinking that some people are post-truth or post-facts or something like that. And there might be people like that. There might be actors like that. But I think Nguyen's analysis lets us see that there might be some agents who are in some sense acting in epistemic good faith, but nonetheless are in these pernicious epistemic situations. I'll say a little bit more about bad faith actors at the end too. The final thing that's important to note about echo chambers that he points out is that trying to give counter evidence to them might reinforce the echo chamber. So suppose I come across the flat earther online, and they're making claims about how the Earth is flat, and I think, well, okay, this is a really easy thing to give counter evidence for. I can just show you a picture that has been taken from space, and the shape of the Earth is clearly, globular. The problem with that is that often in an echo chamber, what will happen is that privileged source, flatearthfacts.com, will make predictions like they're going to try and discredit me, or they're going to try and undermine these claims by doing X. So for instance, something that you find if you look at, flat earth, pro-flat earth websites, is they'll consider kind of possible counter arguments. And NASA has taken pictures from space as something that they'll explicitly consider and say, well, that's fake. They've made those pictures up. And so what happens if I come along to the flat earther and show them this picture is that I've now made true a prediction that their already overly trusted source gave. The overly trusted source said, hey, they're going to try and discredit me in this way. And that's exactly what I've tried to do. And in general, when someone makes a prediction and it turns out to be correct, the rational thing to do is to increase your credibility in that source. And so there's a real worry here that trying to give counter evidence to those in the grip of an echo chamber might reinforce it. All right, so we've got meta-epistemic negotiation and echo chambers. And now I want to put them together to try and talk about entrenched disagreements online and epistemically toxic online behavior. So I think a lot of EDOs involve meta-epistemic negotiation. So the dispute looks like it's conducted in first order terms. It's a dispute about who won the election, say. And there is a first order disagreement there, but this is also expressing, and perhaps more importantly in some circumstances, this meta-epistemic disagreement about, say, which media sources are fundamentally trustworthy. And when we couple this with, when one party to the epistemic disagreement, the entrenched disagreement online is in an echo chamber, then these meta-epistemic negotiations are about this quite high stakes thing. This is a conflict about whether to accept a skewed credibility distribution or not. It's a conflict about whether, flat earth facts is completely correct about everything that they have to say about the shape of the earth, whereas other sources are not. And so the combination, I don't necessarily think that all EDOs involve meta-epistemic negotiation all the time, or that all of them involve people in echo chambers, but I think they're most pernicious when that combination of things happens, and here's why. So I asked at the beginning a few questions. 4 of them were diagnostic, and 1 was kind of, what are we supposed to do about this? So let's start with the diagnostic questions. Why is it that EDOs are entrenched? Well, when someone who's engaged in an EDO is in an echo chamber, that gives us a clear sort of explanation for why they're entrenched. If you have that skewed credibility distribution, you're very, very, very unlikely to shift off that credibility distribution unless the person at the top of your credibility chain were to somehow go about undermining their own credibility. But if you're in the skewed credibility distribution, with respect to, say, the Earth's shape, if I come along and give you evidence for sources that have been discredited, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to change your mind. And on the flip side, if I'm not in your echo chamber, I'm very, very unlikely to credit, at least anywhere near as much, the sources that you credit, and I am likely to credit the sources that you discredit. And so again, when we try and give evidence to one another, it's just very unlikely that we're going to shift each other off these issues. I also think that when this conflict happens via meta-epistemic negotiation, via this indirect disputation mechanism, that kind of complicates matters. And this leads into the second question, like, why do people bother disputing about EDOs? Well, I think meta-epistemic negotiation can kind of lull us into a false sense of disputational security. If someone just says the Earth is flat, it can be really tempting to just think, well, if I just give you the right piece of evidence that entails that the Earth is not flat, surely you will change your mind. If I just give you the right picture or the right kind of, geometric demonstration or the right kind of whatever, world history, whatever it is, it can be really tempting to just think that when everything is just couched in this first order guise of, what shape is the Earth, it can be really tempting to just think, if I can just give you the right piece of evidence, you're going to change your mind. But what the meta-epistemic negotiation is doing is obfuscating that there's this incredibly deep disagreement in the background about, who to trust and what sources are trustworthy and who not to trust. And so if I come into this dispute assuming that there's some common ground, some kind of evidentiary common ground that we're likely to share, at least sort of agree about some fundamental epistemic questions, then I might think that if I give you some kinds of evidence that I think are in bounds and that say are in bounds with respect to the flat Earth situation, then I think I'm going to change your mind. But you, unfortunately, in the grip of your echo chamber, are beyond having your mind changed in that way. I think this also explains why some EDOs that it seems weird to get highly worked up about can become highly charged. So, you know, as I said before, the kind of bare fact of the Earth's shape is an odd thing to construct an identity around, but who and what are fundamentally trustworthy is much more obviously an important matter of identity that you're going to get worked up about. You know, who's a sheep and who's a truth seeker? Sometimes things get couched in these kinds of terminology. So if via meta-epistemic negotiation, part of what's going on is fundamentally deep disagreement about some of our most deep epistemic questions, then it makes much more sense, I think, intuitively to see how people are going to have that become highly charged because it's part of their identities. So why is all this epistemically toxic? Why does it degrade the epistemic environment? Well, some of that just sort of follows from what I've just said. You know, to the extent that people are in echo chambers, that's bad for the epistemic environment. Obviously, the people in the echo chamber are in a really bad epistemic situation, but also those of us outside of the echo chamber trying to give counter evidence might just risk reinforcing it, and that's problematic as well. And I think all of this is made worse by the obfuscatory mechanism of meta-epistemic negotiation. Because, you know, when this happens via first order disputes, it might be harder to realize that you're in a dispute with someone who's in an echo chamber. And so you might be more tempted to kind of press on with the first order dispute and risk reinforcing the echo chamber even further. I've focused so far on sort of good faith actors, but just a quick word about bad faith actors. I worry also that bad faith actors might sort of hijack meta-epistemic negotiation in order to let them sort of appropriate the veneer of good faith first order inquiry. You know, so I think sometimes the just asking questions phenomenon is a bit like this. I'm just asking questions about the shape of the Earth. I'm just asking questions about NASA or something like that. But what they're really trying to do, these bad faith actors, is not really propagate these first order claims or even have a proper genuine dispute about them. Really, they're trying to enforce and entrench and establish their skewed credibility distributions and maybe draw in other people into their echo chamber. So finally, a word about possible solutions here. What should we do about EDOs and other epistemically toxic online behavior? One thought is to engage in epistemic assent. To the extent that meta-epistemic negotiation kind of muddies the waters and makes it less clear part of what the deep disagreement is about, maybe we should ascend to that higher kind of level and start asking more explicitly epistemic questions. What are your sources? Why are they trustworthy? Is there any evidence you could get that would make you doubt that source? I do think caution is required here because I worry that the same mechanism that, you know, Nguyen identifies that can reinforce echo chambers when we give first order counter evidence might also kick into play here. It might be that the problematic facts.com or whoever has predicted that one of the ways that will challenge, that you'll be challenged is by people impugning the credibility of your sources or something like that. So partly this is an empirical question, you know, is it going to be more effective to ascend and ask these epistemic questions rather than trying to engage in the first order disputes? And I think that's an empirical question that's well worth trying to get a better handle on. But I do think that we need to exercise some caution. This definitely isn't a panacea. I don't think there is a panacea here, but I do think that the kinds of solutions we need are going to be pretty radical and pretty broad. Because actors in echo chambers can engage, can be pretty rational given their skewed credibility distributions, and because meta-epistemic negotiation is, I don't think there's any pernicious in that phenomenon, anything in that pernicious in that phenomenon itself. I think we're going to need to re-engineer our epistemic environments. What that's going to look like in the short term, I don't really know, and I'm honestly quite pessimistic about doing that. But I think, you know, broadly, our epistemic environment isn't just a social media platform, it's partly to do with our public education and things like that. And I think really that ultimately long-term solutions here are going to require giving people better, what we might call epistemic literacy, so that they can protect themselves from having these skewed credibility distributions. Yeah, I'd love to be able to give you a nice, sharp, neat solution that we can implement right now. But I can't. I'm really excited to hear if anyone has any bright ideas though. So just to sum up incredibly briefly, there's this kind of epistemically toxic behavior, entrenched disagreement online. I think if we think about meta-epistemic negotiation and echo chambers together, we can see why that behavior is toxic and pessimistically think about how to try and solve it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chris. Great start. Comments and questions for Chris? Abe.
Thanks, Chris, for your presentation. It was quite interesting. I was listening to you, and it's like an experience with a friend of mine came to mind, right? They believe that the coronavirus was manufactured to get rid of the poor people. They strongly believe this. I've argued over and over and over, and we're heading nowhere with it. But when the vaccines became available, they were also the first to register for it, and they strongly believe that the vaccines are meant to keep them safe from the coronavirus. So when you were talking about how some ideas about the sources of our information are like entrenched to our identity, right? This is a person that strongly believes in, well, two different theories that probably come from very conflicting sources of information, right? And they are willing to act on both, believe that the rich are against the poor, but also believe that there are vaccines there to help us. I don't know where something like this fits into the picture of what you're arguing for.
Yeah, thanks, Abe. That's a really, really interesting kind of case. So in general here, what I like to try and do, and this is why I like T's work, is to try and interpret people as being as rational as possible until we really have to interpret them as not. And so obviously, you know your friend better than I do, but I'd be really interested in kind of drilling down a bit more deeply into their sources. And if they see that there's any conflict in these claims, or if there's some way in their kind of background epistemology that they have been able to kind of square what on the face of it look like two very conflicting kinds of claim. And I think that, I mean, maybe the answer is no, and maybe this person is ultimately like being fairly irrational. But I think that sort of to connect it back to the talk a bit, and I guess I shouldn't talk too much because there are other people in the queue. I think this idea of meta-epistemic negotiation can help here a bit. Because sometimes claims that look not necessarily straightforwardly contradictory, but incompatible at the first order level, if you better understand someone's kind of background epistemic commitments, you might be able to see how they're actually coming to hold them in ways that overall can be kind of more easily rationally evaluated, if that makes sense. So I'd love to chat more about this, but I am aware that there are people in the queue. But thank you so much. That's a really great case.
Thanks, Chris. We have three more questions. If you have a question, please put your hand up. With the organizers, I would prefer that we don't read your questions, but you say them in your own voice. So Ashil is next, then Damon, and I think...
Thank you, Professor Blake Turner, for that. I think you're right about your main claim that there's a, what is it? You say a meta-epistemic conflict. I just have a couple of questions/comments. How do we know if we're